Hello and welcome to another episode of the State of Politics. Today we are joined by Caitlin Lee. Caitlin, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Declan. How are you?
I'm all right. It's lovely to have you on. It's lovely to have a guest. We've not had one in a few weeks. So, just to kick us off, could you tell us a wee bit about yourself and tell us what your current role is and, basically what we're probably going to be talking about today?
Yeah. I'm Caitlin Lee. I'm the branch chair of Unite Hospitality in Glasgow. So it's Unite Hospitality and Services. Sorry, I always forget that because I'm a hospitality worker. So we have about over 2,000 members in Glasgow, and I recently became the chair in January. So in the role, it's like protecting workers within their workplaces, kind of building campaigns like out with that. As well, like for kind of wider workplace, and just quite a bit of trade union activism.
In that role, what is it you do sort of day to day, Monday to Friday, as a trade union organiser, and why is that important to workers in general, but also in the hospitality sector?
So my role is actually quite interesting. So in hospitality, traditionally, workplaces don't recognise unions, and they kind of block us from being in there, and that's obviously by design so that you can exploit the workers. So if I was in my position in, say, a traditional workplace like a factory or kind of like the buses or the council, I would have 2 days at work where I would be paid, and then I would involve myself in that with the workplace. Because it's outside of the work, it's almost like a double life. So like I do this on my days off, like, and it's like arranging kind of events, like supporting people, like people coming and speaking to you and asking you. A lot of it is just making sure people know their rights. So we'll get people say, I just did a 12-hour shift and I didn't get a break. Is that right? You're like, no. As per the Working Time Directive, this is what you so this is how you need to kind of and then build the confidence of people to be able to like approach their employer and say, you're not doing this. Like, I have worked here for 6 months and I don't have a contract and need one. And if they don't get it, and then that's when you get involved. So it is quite a big role, and then we also have like regular branch meetings. They're monthly, and I'm the chair, so I can chair them. So that's like trying to get everyone there. We do have quite good attendance, see, because it's all on Zoom. It's a lot easier to get people out. So we'll get like kind of 40 members in a room, and like kind of discuss like what are we wanting to do, what issues are happening in the city, like what should we start kind of campaigning for, or what do people need, and can do that, and then just constantly keeping up to date with like the other officials. Like we've got an equalities officer and like a health and safety officer. So for instance, this weekend we were really busy looking at is there any legislation on working in these kind of heats and what that's going to do for workers and how to get that information out to them and make sure that people are kind of safe. It's a really important role to be in and do, particularly because in hospitality it is quite hard to unionise workplaces, and it is a very exploitative industry. Like, for instance, with I don't know if you have seen, there's a lot of stuff coming out about like Michelin star restaurants and how chefs are being treated there. There's obviously a very well-known brewery that's had a lot of ex-workers come out and say it, and now we've got kind of workers that are there that are hiding their identity and stuff, and they have a kind of group that are all members called Punks with Purpose. So at our last branch meeting, they have a GoFundMe page set up, and that GoFundMe is for mental health support for these workers. Their first target was £1,000. They met that, and our branch has motioned to double that. So that's going to go to the workers that are really bravely signing their name onto this to kind of expose what's going on in the industry and stuff. So there's a lot of support in it, and like a lot of kind of like activism, like now that we can go out in the streets. and kind of speak to, like, go into workplaces and kind of picket places and stuff like that. That's what we're going to start moving towards in the summer. I'll finish there now, because I've covered quite a lot.
See how you said, Caitlin, that, you know, through Zoom you've probably been able to connect with people a lot easier. Do you feel that, obviously you took on the role in January this year in the middle of the pandemic, do you feel as if hospitality workers have become a wee bit more aware of, you know, the pressures that they're working on and the way in which employers have treated them? Because obviously for majority time through this, when the country started opening up last year, the environment wasn't 100% safe for them to be, you know, totally working in.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, like last year in 2020, 58,000 hospitality workers in Scotland lost their jobs. And that was through, like, obviously we had the furlough scheme, but employers were like abusing that, not using it, using the not knowing if it was going to be extended as an excuse for making, like, people redundant, like kind of doing like illegal redundancies, and then people coming into their work and their workplace is not providing like hand sanitizer or face mask or kind of things like that, which really so there was a lot of kind of issues there. So we did get quite a large like intake of members in Unite. Hospitality and services was the sector that actually grew, and we grew by 11%, because I think a lot with like trade unions, the membership's actually decreasing, but in our industry it's increasing. And it was because people were, one, like for me, for instance, like I can say I only became active when my workplace initiated the redundancy process, and I'm trying to frantically look on ACAS to find, like, what are my rights, like what am I entitled to, what does this actually mean? And because I had been a member, but just a subs paying member, I hadn't actually been active at all. And then kind of getting in contact with the organiser and trying to obviously kind of direct people within the workplace to kind of try and join as well. And I think we did have quite a bit of success with delaying the redundancy process. And that got people an extra like 3 months of furlough, which is small in comparison. But when you actually kind of look at the bigger picture, that was 3 months' wages in the middle of like the peak, the first peak in the first lockdown. So like things like that, it showed that it does work. And I think what we're trying really hard to do now is you get the acute panic joining, which is quite rightly so. Like if from what happened in 2020, but it's now like building a branch and building campaigns and listening to members and actually retaining them and making sure that they know that they're now kind of, if we're moving on from COVID, that they're now still going to be supported with other issues that will come up.
A few minutes ago you said that some hospitality businesses don't recognise unions. What does that mean? Do they just sort of like not sit down with Unite to discuss, I don't know, workers' rights, wages, whatever? And what can people and workers and also unions do to make these businesses recognise unions? Does everyone need to join in order for that to happen?
So basically when, like, for one of the examples that happened to me was when I had to go through my redundancy meetings. You are legally entitled to a trade union representative. We were informed, no, you are not. Like they tried to block them in the room. And so that's how hostile it can actually be. So it is, and it is difficult. Like, but what all you need to do is just say no, like, and be that person that has to then go into the room. So, like, if people need something, so you can still always be represented by a trade union, right? So even if you're in a hospitality venue, you can be represented by, like, myself or an organiser, if you're a paying member. The employer has to, like, see if they're going through a disciplinary process or like a grievance process, the employer has to accept your representation. Where workplaces are different is, see if there's a kind of dispute around, like, even something so mundane like a coffee machine. like you want a coffee machine in your canteen, it would be, if you were in a kind of traditional trade union workplace, it would be your rep that you would go to and say, I want this, and blah, blah, blah. And they'd sit down with the employer and be like, right, can we get this? Can we do this? Kind of thing. That doesn't happen in hospitality. So that's why like wages are so small. Like wages are so low as well. Like we're the lowest paid industry because we don't have that relationship with the employer to negotiate anything. So it's more like they can't ignore the law, but they don't engage in negotiations with kind of like better pay or say we want taxis home and stuff like that. To be a recognised trade union in hospitality, like in a hospitality venue, you need 50% plus one. So that can be really difficult in, say, for instance, a hotel where there's 300 workers. And so I think that's one of the problems, and the kind of work does actively discourage you. You end up getting things like employee boards, where it's a representative and then it's actually just you talking to like HR and stuff. It's in replace of it, but they don't work. Like I'm on one, they don't work. So yeah, but there are things like you can do, like obviously joining. Like we are launching on the 18th of September our Fair Hospitality Charter, which is going to have 9 key demands about what the hospitality industry actually needs. And that's going to be things like trade union access, the real living wage, a proactive sexual harassment policy in all workplaces for members, for like customers and staff, free taxis home, all these things that the industry actually needs. And we've had some success in some places in Scotland so far. So there's 3 pubs in Aberfeldy that have signed up to the full charter. There's a hotel up in Perth, and it's kind of like you know, like the like a living wage employer. You get an accreditation, and people are aware that that's a living wage employer. I think that's the kind of model that we want to do, but we're also kind of reticent on that because you still need to have the trade union access. So they could say we're a living wage employer, but we're only giving them 5 hours a week. That's not good enough either. So I think that's where you need trade union access.
Caitlin, you said that membership grew by 11%. See going forward, and if more people do become involved in the industry, and as that kind of collectiveness there, do you see especially businesses in the hospitality sector kind of, don't want to use the term giving in, but starting to listen to you and sit down because they see that there is that collectiveness there from workers, and that if they don't change, people either look for a different sector or just won't go into the industry, but they'll be short because now we're in a situation where there is such bad shortages due to Brexit and due to the situation that we're living in, where people can't go into work due to isolation and things like that.
Mm-hmm. No, I do think we are in a really interesting situation where we actually do have a lot of leverage. So it is kind of trying to build membership. So if I think we've all seen like the article, like the BBC pure kind of scaremongering and saying like, oh, there's such a shortage of like staff of bars and restaurants, and Brexit has obviously an impact on that. However, it's this kind of narrative that's getting created of, where are all these hospitality workers? They're all gone. They're like, no, we're here. You made us all redundant and ignored that. You then had a situation before COVID that we were exploited. We've now decided that we've moved on to an industry, and now you've got a skills gap, and now you can build your business around, funnily enough, minimum wage and minimum support for your staff. So I think that's where we need to start being a lot more vocal and a lot more active in saying, and in the situation we are now, that we have more leverage and we have more of an opportunity because of these shortages to say, if you want workers, you need to pay them, is I think the kind of main thing.
I think you touched on saying how union numbers are going down. Is that right?
Yeah, for like kind of more like just within unions in general, they are kind of decreasing.
What I mean, why do you think that is? And is it because of that 50% plus one rule, where businesses don't need to some businesses don't need to recognise trade unions? And is that a political thing? Could the government get rid of that 50% plus one rule?
Aye. So I think since Thatcher, like, unions have been getting destroyed, and I think we're at a point where this is like the repercussions of so many different parts. Like, for instance, there's so many kind of archaic rules that you just can't get around. Like, there's a general secretary election in Unite just now, and we can only do paper ballots because that was a law made by Thatcher. And like, so then you get a lower number of people voting because it's harder to kind of do that. Whereas like if you got an email and you did it, that would be a lot easier. So that's just kind of one small example. But I think systematically unions are getting repressed. And I think there's a real danger with unions that, well, I can speak for mine, that they're far too political. And it's not so much focused on the workplace, or it's not so much focused on getting better wages for the workers or getting a better condition for them. It's more looking at like kind of top up and like, what can we do here? Like, who can I get involved with and stuff like that? And like, I think there's a real disconnect with the workplace and what a union should, and workers. And I think unions need to kind of realise that they need to actually get back to what it actually was, and that's focusing on workplace issues as opposed to looking at the wider political situation.
Would you say then that, people that are maybe bosses or unions are climbed up in unions that have became to that part, just like politicians themselves, and, are disregarding those, that make up the union, really just to kind of keep cozy at the top and not really, take the points from people underneath them then?
Absolutely. I really do think that, I mean, I'm quite critical and quite cynical, that I think if anyone kind of gets to the top of anything, you forget what's actually got you there. And I think there's multiple reasons why the power doesn't seem to be at the bottom with like the workers in the workplace. But I do think there is a big kind of disengagement between kind of high up in unions and actual sub-paying lay members.
Just to quickly go back to Thatcher, she obviously done quite a lot in her 11 and a half years. Apart from that paper ballots, because I seen that on Twitter recently, I thought that was quite, just ridiculous how old and archaic that is. What are some of the other things that she done that obviously like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and the rest of them haven't reversed since she's left office?
See, this is where I'm like, because I mean, I can think about like all the kind of rules on like pickets and stuff like that as well, or like strikes and like what you need to do there. Like, I think those are obviously there to kind of prevent like real kind of power. Like, see, when you think about things, that if a workplace, like say for instance, I went into my workplace and we hadn't been paid correctly, and I got everyone together, kind of collectivised and said, right, as soon as service starts, we all walk out and we stand outside till we're paid. We wouldn't be able to do that because we've not put it to ballot, we've not asked this, we've not done that, and we've not gave warning. Whereas, so then you have to you go through like negotiations and stuff like that. And I think sometimes the real power needs to be reactionary. But I think the reactionary side of it has been curtailed. There's other things like what we're really concerned about just now, like even to kind of bring it very current, is the police and crimes bill is a real concern for like trade unionists and stuff like that, because like things like if your protest is too loud, that's like who has a quiet protest, like that's what are we all to stand like, that's not going to work. So it's a deliberate attempt at curtailing like democracy and curtailing actual power that people have, and the power that people have is collectivizing and is gathering.
Do you see, this government a lot has been made about this recent government compared to Thatcher. At times worse than that Thatcher government for the kind of the policies that have been brought in, because there's still a Brexit disaster, which we're still seeing. We're seeing images this week of shelves being empty due to staff shortages and Brexit, and then we're seeing policies like this come through. Caitlin, it's almost as if anybody that wants to. I mean, for me as well as a going into fourth-year journalism student, we're getting told that there's a possibility a bill could come in that if we do anything to embarrass the government, I could get the jail for quite a substantial amount of time. Is there a fear that, when is this going to stop with this government? They're just going to keep going and on until probably they probably would just completely dissolve unions if they could altogether?
Aye, totally. Like, I think what we're in just now is it's not terrifying, like it's predictable. I would say like we're in a real like dangerous situation, and I think but we've been in this situation for like what, 10 years, over 10 years, like we've had
11
10
years.
Right? We had
11 years.
we had 10 years of austerity, and nobody did anything. Like we've had the fact that we have more food banks in this country than I can't even remember what the stat was, but it was a pure like we have more food banks in this country than something else. And it's like back when it was like Labour, and I'm very critical of like Blair. In that era of Labour, I think there was like 5 food banks in the UK. And now where we're at, like I think in my area, I could tell you at least 4 in walking distance. So that's like, even if you don't, like if you look at some of the laws that are getting passed and stuff, that's terrifying. But if you look at how inhumane we're becoming as even a society, that we've actually accepted all of this. So these kind of now draconian, like fascist laws coming in against like journalists and stuff like that, that's a concern. But where we're actually at, just as like humans, like actually as a society, we've been stripped right back. And I know that's what Thatcher wanted to do. She didn't believe in society, and she wanted to tear society apart. I think this government has actually done that more so, and it's the blaming of other people, or kind of blaming it for other parts of society, and the kind of villainising every single person that isn't you is terrifying. And I think that's what they've really, really done. They've really tore us apart. So yeah.
We've spoken quite a lot about how bad the Tories are, and that's like really, really obvious. But and they've just stripped trade union rights the past 45 years or whatever it is. Is there anything that the Scottish government can do to sort of boost trade union power? Is there anything they're doing that harms trade unions? Is there anything that they could do better for workers and workplaces?
Well, I think so independence is obviously the best scenario, I think, for workers. We need, because that's how we'll get it. I think what the SNP could possibly be pushing for just now would be Devo Max self-employment law. Now, a lot of my I had a really, really productive meeting with an MSP. I can't remember his position, but anyway, so I had a really, really productive one with him, and I was speaking about the kind of issues that we have and stuff. And I am aware that it's going to come to the point where he's going to go, we don't have, that's not a devolved power. Like, do you know what? And that's the problem. And I think what we should be looking at is employment law should be devolved, and then we'd at least have a bit more control. And I don't know, and I think the SNP are kind of lacking in actually pushing for that more, and kind of looking at fire and rehire, right? Fire and rehire has ripped this, like Scotland, England, ripped it apart. Like I experienced it. There's so many people, like it's de-skilling workers, it's lower wages, it's putting them in a more precarious situation, and it can be outlawed. I think Italy has outlawed it, and there's a few other European countries that have done it. And it's what the Scottish government should be doing. It should be being far more vocal about fire and rehire. However, they'll turn around and go, it's not a devolved issue. We can't change and make that illegal. So that, okay, so why don't we get to the root of the problem and actually look at getting more devolution until we're independent? I think there's an issue. My main issue that I would say maybe kind of that does impact this is the let's wait till there's independence, or kind of like, I feel like sometimes it's a bit of like kind of getting dangled and saying like, we could sort this if we were independent. Like, nah, like sort it now and prove it. I think it's a way to kind of go about it. So that's probably what I would like to see as a worker.
Just on that, you were saying how independence is probably the best thing for workers. Why do you think so many people in the Labour Party disagree with that? And then secondly, you were saying about the SNP aren't vocal enough on employment law. In the election, they promised to have a referendum, whether it's Westminster grants one or not, and they're willing to go to court to fight that. Why do you think there's not that same passion when it comes to like drugs with Peter Crikant? He's saying that they should challenge the law on this and take it to court if they have to. And then you're saying with employment, why aren't they being so forthright with areas that actually matter as opposed to like a big constitutional question?
Aye. Right, I'm going to answer the second one first, if that's all right.
Question, Patrick.
That's good. So the critical part of me does think that it's because if we're in a situation where we are, as a country, in good stead, then there's less of an argument for independence. So say, for instance, I'll be completely honest, if in 2017, and then obviously if it happened in 2017, 2019 wouldn't have happened, like the general election, if it had been Corbyn's Labour, I would have found it real difficulty to vote for an independent Scotland, because I'd have been in a situation where I think Scotland wouldn't have been able to reciprocate, and it would have been the best for Scotland, but also like the UK. So I think that's because that would have been a better situation. I think there's a lot of ease in being able to say, I'm in no way saying the SNP are happy that the Tories are in government. But if you have like the kind of Tories, and if you have like a harder situation here, you've got more of a mandate to go, we could make it better, as opposed to like, that's even just a better campaign slogan than saying we could make it better, as opposed to going, see, we've made it better, so trust us. Like, you know. So I think that's maybe one of the problems, is if people, and then we need to kind of look at like political engagement and also how people kind of react to situations. If people are happy, they're going to be like, well, why does it matter? Do you know,
which that Corbyn government would probably have done, because it was introducing powers, not powers, it was introducing policy that, you know, would have helped a lot of working class people, and especially stuff in Scotland that, as you're saying, would have created a situation where there probably maybe wouldn't have been that greater want. But 7 years on from, you know, referendum in 2014, we've had Brexit, we've had three Tory election victories. They win that many. I'm losing track here. And, you know, a situation through COVID as well, where people would maybe, some people would say, you know, the SNP government has made a lot better situation than the Tories have through it in terms of governance and then winning an election. So there probably is that fact, as you say, that, you know, had it not as been in a situation in the past 7 years since that referendum, then maybe wouldn't have been that greater want from the Scottish people, had we still been in Europe and had, you know, the Tories not got back into power.
Aye, definitely. Yeah, I think that's what I think about that. I can come back to the other part, like workers and kind of Labour. I'm quite interested in this in Scotland, because I think I don't actually see like a lot of people that I know that are kind of like trade unionists and kind of like workers and working in like precarious industries. They don't talk about Labour as if like they're the ones for it, like they're the party for the workers. And I think we look at things like we don't have that, to be honest. Like I wouldn't see, we've got quite strong individuals in the Labour Party, like Scottish Labour. But But as a whole, I don't see it as the party for workers. I don't think there is a party that's kind of solely focused on workers, and I didn't believe that that was the kind of main priority that you should have, but I'm actually more increasingly becoming more aware that workers need to be empowered, and then let the politics go up that way, as opposed to politics trickling down to workers. Whereas I used to think the complete opposite, which I think is quite interesting that that's kind of happening to me just now. Like, I've kind of changed my mind. I think because the SNP doesn't have such a strong stance on like the Working Time Directive or those kind of policies and stuff, that's why we don't get a lot of you don't get a lot of red workers supporting SNP. The Greens seem to be doing, like, I have a lot of friends that, and a lot of what the Greens were saying, I was really agreeing with, and I do still think that the Greens maybe have a better understanding of it, and I think there's quite a lot of like young kind of Labour people like myself that are maybe moving towards more the Green, more like the Scottish Greens Party than Labour. But I think Labour need to do far more in Westminster. They might think about becoming the opposition. That might be quite helpful. And then also in Scotland, I think it is kind of engaging in just this. It's like the SNP the thing that everyone says is, you talk about indie ref all the time, you talk about indie ref all the time. Well, that's what's stalemating Scottish Labour, because they just won't budge on it. I mean, like, maybe listen, like, maybe don't, like, you can campaign however you want, but maybe realise that there's a mandate for that, and if you don't recognise that, Labour are going to continue to suffer. So why not allow the democratic process to happen? And if you don't think, if as a party you want to toe a certain line, then that's fine, but allow workers to democratically decide that.
Labour Party's always had good links. Sorry, Patrick. Labour Party's always had good links with trade unions, and you know, a lot of good people have came from trade unions and went into politics via that direction. You know, was it that Blair government that you think just kind of destroyed that? And do you ever think it will get back to that? Because there's probably hints of it under Corbyn, of a Labour Party being open and willing to listen to people and listen to workers and fully represent people and give them, you know, a better, you know, chance in life. Do you ever feel as if anybody at the moment, you know, probably not Keir Starmer, from what you've said there, is you'd probably like him to stop sitting in the fence, but if a guy like Andy Burnham or somebody came in, that Labour could get back to that type of policy? Or do you think that's totally gone, and you'll find that more young people like yourself or people getting involved in trade unions will look to a party like the Greens who seem to have a better vision for the future in terms, not just, you know, on issues like climate, but in terms of workers' rights and everything else? We've seen today that, you know, that the under-22 bus passes are going to come in, which is going to help a lot of people. You were talking earlier on about free taxis for workers going home, and those nine demands, that, you know, how much that's going to help younger people, because anybody who's going into a job under the age of 22 is going to have free travel now, which is pushed on by the Green Party. So do you see a situation that Labour can get back to that strong relationship with trade unions, or do you think that's totally gone now? And do you think anybody could change that, like Andy Burnham or somebody?
I think it is interesting. So, like, in like my third year at uni, we looked at kind of Blair and what he did, because I mean, I was from a Labour household, and then it was and then kind of beginning to start being critical of Blair. I was like, oh no, I'm a traitor, but like kind of realising what it was, and then actually looking at some of the policies that he put in place and some of the things that he wanted to do, I was like, you were creating individualism as well, which I was
come
quite...
back. He always drops out. Like, he will come back. Don't worry. He's not bored. He'll come back. Carry on.
So I think there was a lot, like, it was put on a lot of, like, there was a lot of individualism with Blair, and if you look at things like, it was vilified, they were vilifying the working class then as well. Like, there were so many kind of policies that were not like really like those kind of houses in Dundee where if you were recognised as like an ASBO family and what that entailed, like things like that, you're like, wait, was that Labour? Okay. So I don't think so. I think the shift has been coming for a long time, and I think Labour did not do enough when they were in power at that time, and then from that we're still getting the like knock-on effect from it. I think progressive parties for young people are the best way to go, because that's young people are like people like in unions, they love young folk because they are like kind of raj. Like you get the retired members that are raj, and then you've got the young ones, and that's who they love to like put in front of the cameras. Like that's who they love getting speeches and they love kind of listening to, because they're like, oh, they're so radical and they know what they want and they've got all these demands. And then for some reason, maybe it's because we don't get listened to, that stops, and then it's just kind of, it's almost as if you just become like Starmer. Like it just sort of like there's just a disconnect there. But I think the Greens have really encapsulated what Scotland needs, and it's not just like with the environment, or like they're looking at like education, like equality, workers' rights and stuff. I think the Greens are really encapsulating every kind of part that's actually needed. And you don't hear, like, they're a pro-independence party, but you don't hear it constantly. Like, they're not saying like, oh, we would do this if. I feel like they're kind of like, get the changes and kind of do it. And now I know that it's easy to say that when you are a minority and you're not in the government as well. And I'm aware of that. Like, you can sit and go, I would do this better if it was me. But I think they do have the kind of right idea, and they are who's going to kind of get people involved. Andy Burnham, I think he's an interesting character. I don't,
to say the least.
I know. I don't see. I mean, he wouldn't inspire me as Labour leader. Like, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I think we're in a situation where we're in a really terrible situation, so anyone might be better. However, I don't think he's the saving grace or like anything for the Labour Party. Like Rebecca, I always always do Bailey Long, but I know it's Long Bailey. I'm really interested in her, and then Richard Bergen as well. They ran together, and I voted for them to be Labour leader because I'm actually a Labour member. They were who I wanted, and I think people like that are really good. But we need to be looking at things like, basically, I think we need to look at how parties are actually run just now as well. And I don't think there is a big disconnect, and there is these issues. Like, I know I've got quite a lot of people that are comrades that are actually being expelled from the Labour Party and stuff like that, and we need to look at how the left factions itself, and how if the Labour Party is actually now expelling the left, where's that going to lead it, and is that going to create perhaps a new party? And that might be the solution. I don't know.
We're talking a bit about how, you know, there's in trade unions, there's the young and the old. And with young people, we're told that everyone under the age of 35 is a mad socialist, communist. But it's, you know, like 70% vote for centre, left or left-wing parties. And you've seen with independence, it was a massive majority of young people were pro-independence. In the States, you had a massive amount of young people supporting Bernie Sanders, and then for Corbyn in the UK as well. What's happened is, in my opinion, you've seen this massive amount of energy, a lot of organising, a lot of hope basically in a political campaign, and the hope was that it would sort of continue on it and it would build, and eventually we get some sort of tangible change as opposed to a good campaign. And I think what's happened is, you've seen with independence, the hope was that they wouldn't go back into their box, but I think a lot of people have. They've just sort of joined the SNP and then not done anything. In Labour, after Starmer became leader, I think like 100,000 members left and just gone. and then in Bernie Sanders' case, like the 13 million people that voted for him just voted for Joe Biden, even though he's like a world apart in terms of policy. Aye. Do you think people need to be more involved and organised all the time, every week, every day, every month, every year? Join a trade union, be a member of a political party, campaign, organise, strike, whatever it is, as opposed to just going, oh, I'll vote Labour once every 5 years?
Definitely. But I think there's the element, I don't think all the kind of onus should be on the person to do it. Like, for instance, for me, I was a sub-paid member for 5 years and I answered one survey. Like in my union, and I say I'm a Labour member, but like I've never done like phone banking. I think I've attended one CLP. Do you know, it is kind of hard to be active, but I think it's on the people that are active to do it. So in our branch, I'm very like, if people are kind of like saying like, oh, we need to get people more active, we need to push this, like workers need to do this. Like, you can't force people to want their rights. You also can't shame people that are like, I've got enough going on. You need to make it as like kind of activists, like as party members, as like activists. You need to make it a place where people can kind of come and be able to like speak. Like, I had no confidence to get. I was like, I need to get my degree before I can get involved in anything. Do you know, like, you need to make it into a situation where people do, like the majority of people can, and it is universal support. And I think with a lot of like parties and with a lot of like even trade unions, it can be a very intimidating place to actually enter and be in because of the nature of them. So I think we need to look at how do we actually change what parties are like. Like, I like the kind of like, for instance, like misogyny and like kind of like sexism. We all know it's happening in like trade unions. We know it's happening in parties. We know these things are happening. So as a kind of young woman, I can see it as actually a very intimidating place to be and kind of be active and be vocal. So I think there is elements of it where we need to change the barriers, because people can believe it. Like, you can get really excited, like I did and joined Labour in 2017. But I was like, oh, what am I going to know that someone else doesn't? Like, I don't feel like I have a place to express myself in that situation. So I think we need to kind of change that way to allow people to kind of get more involved, to feel that they can express themselves.
Do you feel in your current role, but because you're a woman, that at times you're not listened to, just your gender? Because even in hospitality, there probably is, at times people feel as if they can, exploit women more than they can men. Oh,
absolutely. So what our branch is leading on just now is a campaign against sexual harassment. Now, I had a really interesting conversation with someone on Friday who was saying, like, so what is it you're wanting to do about this? And I was like, well, we've linked up with a charity that's going to lead like training about this issue, like created for our industry. So it's going to be like, so it's bespoke training for hospitality about sexual harassment, because it is rife in our industry. Like, we're looking at like 90% of people that answered our survey said, yes, I have been sexually harassed. So it's massive. And they were kind of asking, like, so what is it we're wanting? And I was like, and I feel like it was a tick box, and they're like, it's a tick box exercise and maybe not an understanding of the situation. Now, I think that comes from maybe just not listening fully to the scenario now, for whatever reason that had happened. So it's trying to make it clear that this issue, I'm not an expert in it, and there's also elements of like aftercare, or if someone's wanting support and stuff, like these things need to be looked at and addressed. And it's not just send out a survey or can I say that we're going to start tackling this and not actually have the kind of aftercare. And I think that's maybe something that is maybe forgotten about if you aren't a young woman that's in the bar, like that's working on a bar and experiencing it from a colleague behind you, and then also getting it from a customer in front of you. If you're not actually experiencing it or being in that situation, you don't know. And then maybe if it happens to you in your workplace, you don't actually understand that then when you leave and have to wait at a bus stop, that's a terrifying scenario as well, because you're not safe there. You're like walking home at night. So I think sometimes when you look at workplace issues, you forget that there's actual wider societal issues. So as a woman, it can be harder to be vocal and kind of be experiencing in this kind of situation, because then you also have it on the outside as well as within. Does that make sense, if I can explain that? Yeah.
That even when you do leave your workplace, you're still experiencing the same type of environment that you are, but your workplace really should be a safe environment, but yet when you're in that environment, it's not. Type of thing.
There's a general secretary ballot going on for Unite, I believe. I think there's 3 candidates running. I'll see if I can get their names right. Is it Gerard Coyne, Steve Turner, and Sharon Graham? Is that right?
Yes, it is.
How important is it for the union? How important is it?
Patrick.
Thank you.
Very switched on today, by the way. Big questions and remembering stuff.
I'm on the ball. How important is it for... Aye, apart from that, technical difficulties.
Aye.
How important is it for the members? How important is it for workers and sort of trade unions in general? Which one of these 3 people won?
Massive. So
right.
we've had a long period of time with the same person as the General Secretary, Len McCluskey, and now it's to change the union. It's to look at what's actually going on. So Gerard Coyne is the worst thing that could possibly happen to...
Just on McCluskey, Caitlin, what would you say his legacy's been? Because again, we saw a lot of him, especially featured with Jeremy Corbyn. What would you say his legacy's been of Unite Union as he departs?
I don't want to be overly critical. I think what could have been, had Corbyn got in, would have been wonderful for Unite, but that didn't happen. So, and I think that's maybe why. I think that's why it's good that he's stepping down. Like the blank checks that Labour receive from Unite are not on. I don't see why that's happened, because we don't have a leader that reflects what we need. So I'm disappointed in that scenario, but I'm reticent to kind of be overly critical of what will be left behind. I think the union needs to change, and I think the reason that it needs to change is because it became very passive. Like I think you need to kind of look at like bringing power back to the workplace, and that's where we're kind of lacking. Like we do have quite a gap between lay members and then the National Exec Council and stuff like that. We need to have more. We need to have more power in the workplace, and we need to not be focusing on the Labour Party, because one, it doesn't work in the devolved countries. Like Unite, we've got a branch in like Belfast hospitality. They're like, why? And they're saying, why are mass subs going to the Labour Party? Like, Labour Party doesn't even exist. Like, do you know, like they don't have. So they're like, what? Why is that happening? So they are very, very critical of the kind of political situation of Unite. And I don't think Unite are not the Labour Party. And I don't know where this almost kind of idea has came from. Like, for instance, we had like Owen Jones saying that if Sharon was on the ballot, she'd destroy the left movement. Like the left is not dependent on the Labour Party, and it's not dependent on Unite, and it's not on this one candidate's shoulders either. So I think that was it's a very interesting election. But the last one, which was McCluskey and Coyne, he nearly won, but we're a union of over a million workers, and I think 100,000 people voted. So there was a clear disconnect. So this one, we have been kind of campaigning a lot more to get more people to vote, but again, probably won't be a massive majority of members that will actually vote. But just to kind of quickly whistle stop through the candidates, Coyne would be the worst thing to happen to the union. He writes for, I don't even want to say what newspaper it is, but I think you'll know from that. It's one that...
There's quite a lot to choose from.
I
Yes,
know,
there is quite a lot.
I know, it's one that...
What's the letter?
S, don't buy it.
Oh,
Never
oh
buy
dear,
it.
right, okay.
Right.
Is it three letters?
Yeah, and
Oh dear.
he's a
Oh,
columnist for
Oh dear.
that. Yes, and just other issues. He was actually sacked for misconduct as well. So he's not the right candidate.
No.
Steve Turner, I'm quite disappointed that he's actually running, because the whole point was we don't want to split the left vote. So why, I think, if a woman is standing, not just because she's a woman, she's actually the most qualified person to do it, and she cares about the workers, and her manifesto was like 8,000 words. Like, she's really, Sharon has really is the best candidate, and I'm quite disappointed that it's turned very misogynistic, it's turned very bitter. We had Sharon's face morphed with Thatcher's, and said like, oh, this lady's not for turning and stuff, which really misogynistic, deep-rooted sexism in a general secretary campaign for a union, and that has no place in a union, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so important that Sharon gets in. But also, we need to start moving forward, and we need to look at, and what Sharon kind of wants to do is recognise that power needs to go back to the workplace, and that's where it's important. And it's not kind of modelling yourself on a politician or even a contrarian. It's about actually becoming active.
How as a symbol, would that be if a woman was appointed? Because we spoke earlier on about your experience, and especially in your sector, but do you think that would encourage a lot more younger females to get involved in unions, having a general secretary that is female?
I would hope so. Like, Unison has a women general secretary, so I don't know because I don't actually really know anyone that's in Unison. I don't know how that's
Nobody does.
I know, like,
they're just there. I don't know who's a member of it. It just exists.
There, do you know? But I was looking at. So we were looking at sexual harassment, and Unite's policy is quite lacking. But Unison has a really strong sexual harassment policy for like the union, and then also in kind of workplaces. So they are, and an issue that I'm looking at and being critical of in my union, they're actually very good at, like, proactive at. But I think for Unite, it's not right. So there's the issue of, it's called like basically a glass cliff, which is if something's going to go wrong, you put a woman in front of it. So say for instance Brexit, like CEOs, you'll change it because it softens the blow, because you look at it and go, well, there was a woman in charge, and I think it's toxic, but it does happen. Like if we look at what scenario we were in with Brexit and Theresa May, that was absolutely a kind of glass cliff. Like, it was softened because of who it was. Whereas what I'd say, so I think there's the kind of toxic way that you can use women for that way. Whereas I think the likes of like Sharon, if she came in, she would totally change everything about the union, and she would change it for the better, and you would actually see a woman in power and success, because a lot of the time that doesn't actually happen. We get this scenario where they know that shit's gonna hit the fan. Sorry, I'm like, for want of a better phrase, I just couldn't think. Yeah. Sorry, that's pure ironic.
No, that's fine. But what would be your parting message in terms of that to anybody that's a member of Unite, in terms of how important a vote is in this, and how important it is to vote for the candidate who you're proposing to vote for?
I think if you are a member and you haven't voted yet in Unite, vote for Sharon Graham. Like, she's got so many different industries, like the construction industry. She won the BA campaign, and for me personally, I've kind of dealt with her, and a lot of times what her focus is better wages, better working conditions, and all of that is so important for a union and for workers. So if we're in a scenario where we go into another pandemic or whatever and we're still worrying about low wages, that's simply not good enough. We need to look at what scenarios left us more precarious and change them, and it will be people like Sharon Graham leading that, and she would just be the best candidate.
I must admit, I can't remember the name of the guy who dropped out about a month or two ago, so I do apologise. But he did back Steve Turner. Now, when you were saying you're disappointed that Steve Turner is the one splitting the vote, he has got this backing from this other candidate that stepped down. Could there be an element of Sharon Graham splitting the vote as opposed to Steve Turner? You know, what is the difference between them, and why is Sharon better?
Unfortunately, with it's Howard Beckett that got the nominations as well. Unfortunately, there's basically been a kind of deal made between the two of them about what the situation will be. Now, that would be fine to run on that if you actually made people aware of what that deal was. However, that has not been made clear of what the deal between Howard and Steve was, which I think if you don't want to tell someone something, it's probably not what the members want to hear. So I am actually quite concerned about that, and again disappointed in Howard in the way that went down, because I think you could have backed the candidate, because it's every 5 years. Now, I'm not saying that Sharon should only get it for 5 years. She could run again, but I'm very disappointed in both of them for not endorsing a candidate that actually wants to shake things up, and I feel like that's why they didn't step down, is because the amount that she wants to shake things up and the amount that she wants to change things.
Caitlin, just to close, for myself, as we slowly but surely, hopefully, come out of this, awful situation that we've all been living in your position, what would be your kind of vision for the next couple of years for workers in hospitality? And in terms of COVID, at this current point in time, obviously there's been a lot made over track and trace and everything else. What's your kind of thoughts on that in terms of moving forward out of the pandemic, in terms of just general rights and through just now with COVID issues that are faced by hospitality workers?
Yep. So what I would ideally like to see, and I might ask you if I can come back on in September,
very welcome,
when we launch the charter, which is those kind of key demands for workers, and I think that will really help to change the industry. Like I said, we're at a point where we've got a lot of leverage, and we need to start engaging politically as well, to make sure that our industry does improve. So that's what I would like to see. With the situation that we're in just now, like self-isolation, I think that's a very difficult thing. Like the £96 is not enough. Like if you have to self-isolate in your workplace, you should not be then worrying about rent. So I think that's an immediate thing that needs to be sorted. And I know there's the £500 isolation grant, but there have been issues with people not actually receiving that. So I think that's my initial concern, is what we get paid for self-isolating, and just ensuring that the workplaces are safe for people, and we continue to be wearing masks, we continue to have sanitizer and these kind of things. And also customers need to respect, right, I'm checking the time, customers, you need to respect hospitality workers. We've had a hard time, we're now working in roasting conditions, and tip us as well, and be kind to your servers. I think that's the main thing I'd like to kind of hit home.
Just quickly from me before we go, hypothetically, if you're in a workplace and there's about 10 of you, you're in minimum wage, and the company that you work for doesn't recognise trade unions, how do you convince your 9 colleagues, or however many colleagues you might have, to join a union when they're on minimum wage? It all seems a bit hopeless. How would you? What would your message be to people like that?
I would say there is power in collectivising, there is power in having demands. Like, I could go through, if we had more time, I could go through the successes that we've actually had of kind of workplaces where people have had terrible bosses or like poor pay and stuff, and what we've done and kind of campaigning around that and being able to actually make a change in their workplace with like real successes. It does make a difference, and it does help protect you in all parts of your work like environment, like your pay, your furlough, whatever it is. Being in a union does help, and it's people like me that help support you as well, so you can put a face to it, so it's not just like a pure pale stale male, like it's actual workers.
Caitlin, thanks for coming on, giving us your time. Really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you back on when the launch of that, and you can come on and talk to us again. But just for just now, Caitlin Lee, thank you for joining us on The State of Politics.
That's great. Thank you so much, guys. It was lovely.